A ship the size of a skyscraper slams into the sand, on purpose, and the moment it hits the beach, its value flips from millions to whatever can be ripped out before the tide comes back. Most people will never see this place, but if you stand on the coast of Chittagong, Bangladesh, the horizon feels like a secret the global economy has been hiding for years. Dozens of megaships, oil tankers, cargo carriers, decommissioned military vessels lie stranded in the mud like the bones of a dead civilization. Their hulls twisted, their steel peeling, their last journeys ending in complete silence. These ships once powered the modern world. Now they're waiting for barefoot workers with blowtorches to cut them apart. Not in shipyards, but on open beaches where the rules don't reach and the cameras don't stay for long. And here's the part that almost nobody understands. This single stretch of coastline handles nearly half of the world's retired ships. Not Dubai, not Rotterdam, not Houston. Here, a few miles of sand in one of Asia's poorest regions has become the graveyard that keeps global trade cheap enough to function. The world saves billions by sending its dying ships to Bangladesh. Bangladesh earns billions by dismantling them. And between those two truths lies an industry built on danger, toxic waste, and loopholes so big entire fleets disappear through them. Because what happens on this beach doesn't just affect Bangladesh, it affects every oil delivery, every shipping lane, every product we buy, and the price we're all willing to pay for the illusion of cheap. Stay with us, because the further we go into this coastline, the clearer the real story becomes. This isn't a scrapyard. It's an empire, and it wasn't built by ships. It was built by everything the world chose not to see. Welcome to Empire Secrets. Fly over the Bay of Bengal, and you'll see them before you see the city. Dozens of supertankers stranded on the shoreline, tilted on their sides like toppled towers. Their names still visible, ones carrying crude oil across the Arabian Gulf, or iron ore from Brazil, or containers stacked to the sky between Shanghai and Rotterdam. These vessels are too large to dock in normal harbours, too costly to dismantle in the West, so they're run aground here, on the muddy beaches of Chittagong. And every time one hits the sand, it signals the end of a global journey, and the beginning of a darker one. This coastline has become the world's recycling hub for megaships. Every year, Bangladesh dismantles nearly half of all the ships that retire globally. Think about that. One single developing nation is responsible for taking apart vessels that once moved trillions in cargo. The numbers are jaw-dropping. In a good year, over 200 massive ships are pulled onto these beaches, supplying nearly 60% of Bangladesh's steel. The high-rises of Dhaka, highways in the countryside, even the rebar holding apartment blocks together, all of it may have once been the hull of a European oil tanker. It's a strange thought. The steel that once carried the world now holds up a rising nation. From a business perspective, it makes perfect sense. In Europe or America, regulations demand expensive dry docks, heavy cranes, robotic equipment. In Bangladesh, all you need is high tide to beach the ships, low tides to start cutting, and an army of workers with acetylene torches. The cost difference is massive. Breaking a ship here can be 10 times cheaper than in the West. For global shipping companies, that's billions in savings. So the world quietly looks the other way, because cheap disposal keeps global trade alive. But the economy of Chittagong isn't just about cheap labor. It's about geography and timing. Bangladesh has one of the fastest growing populations in Asia and one of the hungriest demands for steel. Mining iron ore and smelting it is expensive and energy intensive. Cutting up a ship already made out of steel is far cheaper, which is why, on this beach, the global shipping industry and Bangladesh's development goals intersect perfectly. Yet behind the economic logic is a scene that feels almost post-apocalyptic. Workers climb onto rusted hulls barefoot, sparks raining down as they slice steel plates the size of billboards. The sound is constant, metal groaning, chains clanking, torches hissing. Every piece is stripped, sold, or recycled. From the steel beams to the lifeboats, even the kitchen equipment. Nothing goes to waste, because in Bangladesh, waste is wealth. And once you see how nothing is wasted, you start to understand why this beach became indispensable to the world economy. And that's how an invisible stretch of coastline became central to both the global shipping economy and Bangladesh's rise. But as we'll see next, the very thing that makes this business so profitable is also what makes it dangerous. On paper, most of these ships should never be here. International regulations, the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention, were designed to stop toxic waste from being dumped in developing countries. A decommissioned tanker isn't just steel, it's asbestos in the walls, PCBs in the paint, oil sludge in the tanks. By law, they're supposed to be dismantled in certified facilities, not on open beaches. So how do they end up here anyway? Loopholes. Shipping companies play a bureaucratic shell game. A vessel owned in Greece can suddenly be sold to a company in Panama for $1 just before retirement. That company doesn't technically fall under European law, so the ship can legally be run around in Bangladesh. Once it's beached, the original owner has already pocketed the profit, and the paperwork trail disappears. This is where Bangladesh enters the story, not just as a scrapyard, but as a pressure valve for global capitalism. Western companies save millions by avoiding strict disposal costs. Bangladesh gets cheaper steel to fuel its construction boom. Everyone benefits, except the workers cutting those holes. From a financial perspective, the math is brutal but effective. Recycling steel in Bangladesh costs $200 per ton. In Europe, the same process can exceed $600 per ton. Multiply that by a 40,000-ton tanker, and you're talking about millions saved on a single vessel. Scale that across hundreds of ships, and it's a hidden subsidy that keeps global trade profitable. For the corporations that own these ships, Chittagong is the perfect exit strategy. Cheap, fast, and conveniently out of sight. And as long as consumers keep demanding faster, cheaper shipping for everything from Amazon packages to oil deliveries, the loophole stays wide open. But for Bangladesh, this isn't just about being a dumping ground. It's about transforming other nations' trash into its own treasure. And that's where the story gets even more complex. At dawn, the tides roll back and the real work begins. Hundreds of men wade out to the holes with nothing but ropes and torches. They scale steel walls taller than a 10-story building. Barefoot, no harness, no helmets. A spark hits the mud and an entire section of deck collapses with a thunderous crash. This isn't demolition, it's surgery with sledgehammers. A worker here earns between $2 and $4 a day. That's less than the price of a single coffee in New York. But for Bangladesh, it's still better than nothing. The industry employs nearly 100,000 people directly and supports another 300,000 indirectly. Families, steel traders, transporters, small workshops that buy leftover equipment. Entire communities depend on these beaches. But the dangers are everywhere. Inhaling asbestos fibers, cutting through oil residue that can explode, carrying steel plates so heavy that one slip can crush a man instantly. Accidents fade from the record as quietly as the ship's ownership papers. Yet the paradox is impossible to ignore. Without these jobs, tens of thousands would sink deeper into poverty. With them, they face risks that would be unimaginable in Europe or America. For Bangladesh, this is the cruel trade-off. Accept dangerous work in exchange for economic growth, or miss out on the billions that flow through this coastline. This is where the global supply chain shows its sharpest edge. The cheap steel in Bangladesh's high-rises, the cheap clothes in Western malls, the cheap shipping that underpins Amazon. Somewhere in that price cut is a man on a beach, torch in hand, betting his life for a wage the rest of the world wouldn't even notice. And the system keeps going because it's not just about survival, it's about power. The same ships that once belonged to the oil majors, the mining giants, even navies, now end their lives fueling Bangladesh's rise. But that rise is about more than labor. It's about steel and scrap. And as we'll see next, that scrap turned into the backbone of a nation. Walk through Dhaka and the city feels like it's in a hurry to catch up with the world. Glass towers rising, highways carving through old neighborhoods, apartment blocks multiplying by the month. The backbone of all that growth is imported from Australia or Brazil. It's stripped straight from the ships on Chittagong's beaches. Shipbreaking provides over half of Bangladesh's steel supply. Without it, the cost of construction would skyrocket. Every ton of rebar in a Dhaka high-rise, every bridge over the rivers that slice through the countryside, every expansion of the garment factories that drive exports, all of it depends on the scrap steel economy. The numbers tell the story. Bangladesh produces more than 4 million tons of recycled steel every year, worth billions on the domestic market. For a country with limited natural resources, this is a shortcut. No iron mines, no expensive smelting operations, just ready-made steel plates waiting to be cut and melted down. But it's not just about construction. A whole secondary economy has grown around the shipbreaking trade. The timber from ship interior fuels local furniture markets. Electrical wiring is stripped and resold. Even the toilets, sinks and chandeliers from cruise liners end up in second-hand bazaars. In Bangladesh, nothing from a small ship is wasted. This creates a strange feedback loop. Western corporations save money by disposing of their ships cheaply in Bangladesh. That cheap steel then builds the very factories that keep producing low-cost goods for the West, garments, textiles, and exports that dominate global retail chains. Bangladesh turns discarded vessels into the infrastructure that powers its climb up the economic ladder. It's the reason the World Bank calls shipbreaking one of Bangladesh's engines of growth. And yet this engine runs on fumes, because the more the industry fuels growth, the more it deepens the country's dependence on the very risks and loopholes that sustain it. Which raises the question, is this an empire built on recycling, or one built on quicksand? To answer that, you have to look at who really controls this industry, and the profits don't always stay in Bangladesh. On the beach, it looks like chaos. Plates of steel crashing down, parts being hauled off in carts. But behind the noise, this industry is anything but disorganized. Shipbreaking is controlled by a tight circle of business families and political elites in Bangladesh. These aren't random scrap dealers, they're empire builders. The industry is dominated by about 100 powerful yard owners, most clustered around Sitakunda, just north of Chittagong. Many of them have deep ties to parliament, the military, or local power brokers. Land for yards is leased through political connections. Licenses are granted or denied based on who you know. In Bangladesh, dismantling ships isn't just a business, it's a gateway into the country's elite. But the real profits start even earlier, before the ships ever touch Bangladeshi sand. Brokers in Singapore, Dubai, and London specialize in buying aging ships from Western owners and reselling them to Bangladeshi yards. It's a shadow network of middlemen, shell companies, and offshore entities that ensure ship owners in Europe can legally wash their hands of the environmental mess. The European company gets a clean exit, the broker takes a fat commission, and the Bangladeshi yard inherits both the profits and the risks. Follow the money and the story becomes global. A ship might start its life under a Norwegian oil giant, then sail under a Panamanian flag, get sold to a paper company in the Marshall Islands, and finally run around in Bangladesh, all within weeks. By the time it's beached, the original owner is gone, and the profits have already been siphoned off through offshore accounts. For Bangladesh, this creates a paradox. The country captures billions in steel value, yes, but it also absorbs the costs, the labor risks, the toxic waste, the polluted beaches. Meanwhile, foreign owners and brokers walk away richer. In many ways, shipbreaking is less about Bangladesh's power and more about how global capital uses Bangladesh as a final stop in the chain. Still, local elites are not victims. They've built fortunes by mastering this game, reinvesting shipbreaking profits into banks, real estate, and the garment industry. For them, the beach isn't just a workplace, it's a launchpad into national power. Which begs the question, if everyone profits, local tycoons, foreign brokers, and Western corporations, who pays the real price? What the steel industry gains, the coastline loses. Every ship carries a toxic inheritance. Asbestos woven into insulation, heavy metals in the paint, mercury and lead in the pipes, even radioactive material from old warships has shown up here. When these holes are cut open, none of it is contained. It seeps into the sand, the water, the air. The numbers are monumental. Analysts estimate that shipbreaking in Bangladesh dumps hundreds of thousands of tons of hazardous waste into the environment every year. Beaches once rich with fish and crabs are now barren. Studies show high levels of lead and cadmium in the soil, directly linked to ship dismantling. And this is where the story gets darker. This destruction is profitable. Because Bangladesh absorbs the waste, ship owners abroad save fortunes in disposal costs. Properly removing toxic waste in Europe can cost millions per ship. On these beaches, it's simply discarded into the tide. International NGOs call it one of the world's dirtiest industries. The EU has blacklisted shipbreaking yards, and activists push for bans. Yet the business hasn't slowed down. Why? Because it's cheap. Western consumers want low-cost goods. Shipping companies want low-cost disposal, and Bangladesh needs cheap steel. The system feeds itself, no matter the environmental bill. For Bangladesh, the long-term risk is enormous. Rising seas and climate change already threaten to flood a third of the country by the end of the century. Add toxic coastlines and disappearing fisheries, and the price of today's steel economy may be tomorrow's survival crisis. Still, the industry endures. Not just because of demand, but because of what it represents. These rusting giants are more than scrap. They're symbols of how the global economy shifts its costs onto the weakest players. And in that shift, Bangladesh has carved out a power of its own. Which brings us to the final act, what this empire really means for the future of global trade, and for Bangladesh itself. Every empire leaves behind ruins. Rome has its crumbling amphitheatres. The British left fading railways across continents. The age of global shipping leaves something stranger. Rusting giants dying on a Bangladeshi beach. These ships carried a wealth of nations, oil from the Gulf, goods from China, grain from America. They connected continents, fueled corporations, and defined the modern world. And when their work was done, when they no longer made a profit, they were quietly discarded in Chittagong. But in that act of disposal, a new empire was born. For Bangladesh, shipbreaking is more than an industry. It's a transformation machine. It turns other countries' waste into its own wealth. It converts steel into skyscrapers, discarded engines into local workshops, foreign trash into national growth. The empire of broken ships has built Bangladesh's highways, its garment factories, its modern skyline. But this empire is also fragile. It runs on loopholes, on dangerous labor, on polluted beaches. It exists because the global economy wants cheap steel and cheap shipping. And because Bangladesh is willing to take the risks, others won't. And yet, there's something quietly powerful here. In the shadow of giants, Bangladesh has carved its place into the world economy. Not by building ships, but by unbuilding them. Not by owning the sea, but by consuming it. When you look at the beaches of Chittagong, you're not just seeing wreckage, you're seeing a mirror of globalization itself. A system that never really ends, it just shifts from one coast to another. And that's the hidden truth. The empire of broken ships doesn't belong to Bangladesh alone. It belongs to all of us. Every time we demand cheap goods, fast deliveries, and lower costs, the steel in Dakar's skyline may have started in Rotterdam or Dubai or Houston. The empire is global. Chittagong is just where the truth becomes visible. Because every ship that dies on this beach once passed through the world's most dangerous waters. The choke points that decide who trades, who profits, and who falls behind. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Bosphorus, the Gate of Tears. The passages every one of these giants once squeezed through before ending their lives here in the mud. If you want to understand the full story behind those journeys and the hidden power those narrow waters still hold over the global economy, watch the Choke Point documentaries next. I'll leave you the playlist right here on the screen. It reveals the routes that shaped these ships long before they arrived in Chittagong. Subscribe now to Empire Secrets and join the journey. The world hides its power in plain sight. I'll show you where to look next. Your desire, your empire.